on investment opportunities in startup, for startups, and for investors. We hope to be covering the whole matrix in less than 50 minutes because you have a following panel, and some of our panelists here today do participate in the next panel. I hope it's okay if we do everything in English. I suppose it's what is expected of us, and not the usual Belgian tradition of ieder zijn eigen taal, which is a bit of a private joke on that one. And so I wanted to follow the order of the size of investments and the stage of investments, and I think the person who represents best the earliest stage of investments is Claire Munck. I wanted to introduce everybody in the round table here, and I realized that you actually studied, most of the people around the panel here studied in the US, and you studied at McGill.
In Canada.
In Canada, which is anyway on the other side of the ocean, which is supposed to be where everything is happening. And so I will let you introduce yourself and what your organization does for the very early stage and seed investments in startups. Thank you.
Thank you, José. So hi, everyone. My name is Claire. I have been working in the business angel environment for the last 20 years, first as a manager of a European association gathering business angel groups in Europe. And then I joined BeAngels, which is today a national business angel group focusing on support to early stage startups, as was mentioned. So more specifically, business angels, as some of you might know, are private individuals who will invest part of their own money to acquire shares in general in young companies. And on top of the capital that they bring, they very often look to bring added value, sometimes in the form of participation in a board of directors, based on their experience, their network of contacts. So they want to help one way or the other, and that's really important to know when you're an entrepreneur in terms of their motivation. They're not there just to invest money. They really want to add value to their investment. So BeAngels is an organization that is 21 years old already. We organize every month investment events where pre-selected companies from all sectors of the economy can pitch their investment opportunity, which we have pre-selected, to a gathering of 100, 150 investors. And after that, our investors either take their own individual decision, or we have pooled vehicles where people actually make investment decisions together, or they co-invest with other members of the community. So we have different ways people can invest. And we actually also have, so this is really for the seed phase. The majority of the companies that we see, it's their first external round of financing. So sometimes they have started, they have had money from friends and family, but very often we actually invest at the same time as their friends, family, and we're at the same round as the founders, so very early stage. And so the main criteria for investment for business angels is the team, actually, because a lot of the things that they look at are in construction, under construction. So the team is really important. So maybe more specifically on the topic of today, artificial intelligence and deep tech. Obviously, one of the drivers of investment for business angels is innovation. They love what's new, what's going to disrupt the market. They love, hearing very early about what's going to change the world and in the future. So obviously, artificial intelligence or deep tech are topics that they love because they see a lot of change coming thanks to these technologies. Now, probably one of the issues for them is they are not all familiar with that technology, right? Because our investors come from all walks of life. So they are either, for 50% of them, they're entrepreneurs or past entrepreneurs. For 50% of them, they're managers, very often working very close to innovation, because there's a very strong link, right? You work with really exciting entrepreneurs, and so very soon you want to help them in one way or the other, either as a mentor or as an investor. So that's usually how they come to become a business angel. But certainly, knowing the topic is one probably challenge for the investors who invest in that domain. Another factor is that in technologies, in, I would say, artificial intelligence projects, the time to market is going to be pretty long, right? If we're looking at disruptive technologies, you invest day one, it's probably going to take quite a long time in order to bring that technology to the market, make it something that can be commercialized, and then if you are a shareholder of that company, your time to exit is probably longer than in other sectors of activity. So for some people, that's okay. For some others, that's an additional challenge that they have to face. So what is really needed for them probably in order to be more active as investors in that domain is to work with partners that can help to de-risk their investment, partners that can help to find the deal flow, that have really the links to the universities, to the research centers, people who understand the IP and the barrier to entry, and that can explain it to investors from an investor's point of view. So that is really important. And of course, what they need is, after their involvement, they probably need funds to be able to reinvest in those deals, but also maybe to partially exit or fully exit at one stage. Because again, when you're a private individual and a private investor, it's patient capital, but obviously within, let's say, 5, 7 to maximum 10 years, you want to have exited from that company and recycle your capital. So that's why we work with all of the partners, I think, on this roundtable, but especially Highway AI, which is really an ideal partner for BeAngels in order to be able to channel pre-seed capital to very disruptive technologies that have been de-risked. And so if you agree, I'll just pass the mic to our partner.
Thank you, Claire. Georges, you are going to have to introduce yourself and explain a little what is Highway AI, please.
Sure. Thank you, Claire. I'm the only one in the group who hasn't studied in the US, so I put this on my bucket list, José. About myself, I'm a technologist. That means I'm a civil engineer, so done ULB, Polytech, was really big on microwave, etc. But I realized very quickly in my career that my added value is how I'm good at defining how technology can be used to create economic value, and nowadays more and more also importantly societal value. So that's why in 2008 I joined McKinsey & Company in Louvain-la-Neuve to help McKinsey transform the intellectual property of their research center to create new solutions for their clients at that time. And that was a really eye-opening experience for me, because I realized that one, we can do technology from Belgium. At the peak of McKinsey solution, we had 300 people in Louvain-la-Neuve. We were exporting our solution in all the places in the world, and there were no, let's say, sentiment that we were small Belgium versus the big US or big Asian countries. But at the same time, the sad part of the story is in 2015, the whole thing was somehow delocalized in India and in US. And that was my second learning, is if we want to have ambition as Belgium, we not only should not be afraid to say we can do it. We have the brains, we have the energy, we have the possibility to do it, but we also need to be our own shareholder. We have to be also owning all those companies. Otherwise, we have nothing to say on where they are going to be located when they're going to grow. So in 2018, I had the chance to work with Alexander De Croo around a few other people on defining what we should be doing in Belgium for AI. That was 2018. There was a good report that was published at the time. I really encourage you to go and read it. And one of the axes of that report, what Belgium should be doing to tap into the opportunity of AI, was to reinforce our innovation capability and our ability to create companies. And that's the long story for why I have created Highway AI. Highway AI is a venture builder. That means we are helping to create startups, and we are working with 3 types of entrepreneurs. We are working with universities, because we have a lot of great ideas, great people, great IP in our universities. But I think it's fair to say that there is challenge for getting this IP transformed into commercial product that can create economic value. Second type of people we are working with are the service, what I call the niche service AI companies, and we had a few this morning, I believe, in the audience, the people like Sagacify, B12. We have a lot of smaller companies in Belgium, like between 10 to 100 people. Ranova was here this morning, who are source of innovation, and they have the potential also to put new products on the market. And we are also working with individual entrepreneurs who are typically domain experts, but don't necessarily have all the network, all the track record, or all the competencies to really put a product on the market that can be competitive on a global scale. So Highway AI work with those people. We make different things. One thing is we help them shape their market potential in the best way possible, so that when we come to Claire or we come to other investors, there is no problem. They understand what is the potential, etc. We are sure that the whole team is there for success, to put a product with AI on the market that can be globally competitive. Requires a lot of competencies that you have to assemble, and the team has to work together. So I join Claire on saying this is one of the most important success factor. And finally, we ensure that the financing of this venture can happen as quickly as possible, because speed is the essence to win the potential. There is no idea that I've been thinking about for the last 2 years that has already 5 to 10 other people on the planet who are trying to put a startup in the market. So speed is absolutely essential. The less speed you have, the more chance that you're not going to succeed.
Thank you. Maybe you can pass the microphone to Adrien from Theodorus, who will introduce himself and then what Theodorus is doing.
Okay, so on a personal level, I'm Adrien van der Borght. I have more of a financial background, and after working for a few years for a consultancy company at big corporations, I decided that I would prefer to focus my attention on startups and yes, less inertia in the way that we work. And so I joined the fund, which is Theodorus. So basically, Theodorus, to do the 101, it's a venture capital firm. So what's venture capital? It's basically a type of fund that will invest very early and in very risky companies. And actually, the other side is that if we invest very early and take a lot of risk, we need also to see a lot of reward on the other side, meaning that we are only going to invest in companies with where we see a lot of potential. But that doesn't mean that you need to be afraid to come see us. So we have been working with the ULB. So Theodorus has links with the University of Brussels for a very long time. And what we see is that basically a lot of the technologies that succeeded in our portfolio are companies where the people actually came to see us almost 2 to 3 years before we even did a first investment in the company. So my message would be, if there are people in the room who have projects and need financing or will need it later, it's never too early to come see venture capital firms. And worst case, if it's too early, we'll guide you to the right people. I think there's a lot of them here around. Yeah, so that's what the VC is.
So what do you do that simplifies the life of those entrepreneurs who come and meet you? Why does it take 2 to 3 years for you guys to invest into a company?
Yeah. Well, first of all, because usually it's when we meet them the first time, it's still at the level of the lab, actually. So it's still a technology. They don't even know what market they are going to go into, and I think that's where a lot of mistakes happen, especially going to too niche markets or markets where differentiation will not be enough in terms of technology, etc. So I think that's the first step, is to look at what are the possibilities that you have with the technology and make sure you choose the right one. And I think when you are in the lab all day, sometimes you have too much of a silo view, and you need to test your hypothesis with people outside of your daily life to come up with the right solution.
And so basically they test their hypothesis with you?
Yes. Yeah.
And so once one of the three of you have invested, the next round is going to be to call on larger investment groups like you, Wim.
Well, not me first. So, my name is Wim Dewaele. Actually, I've been, like José, been around in this industry for a while. First, working for software companies myself. And actually, the lessons I learned most in the United States were not so much at university in the United States, but although that was also interesting, but working for American software companies, where you learn the tricks of the trade on how to scale a company, how to set up sales, business development, partnership management, all the things that are necessary to actually get from a good idea to a global company. And in the last 20 years, I think, which I spent back in Europe again, I was involved together with Bart in a research center, iMinds, as a CEO, where we had an accelerator program to actually bring young companies to investable status for VCs. But in 2016, I left then and got involved as a business angel, as an investor, actually working on a studio concept very similar to what José explained. But I'm also, and that's what I'll talk about, otherwise I'm just going to repeat what José said. I'm also an investor in a later stage fund, in a venture capital fund in technology. SmartFin Venture and SmartFin Capital, run by Jürgen Engels, and a former entrepreneur as well. And what I'd like to make two remarks. First of all, you're right. I think it's good to engage with investors, even later stage investors, early on, but don't think they will already invest. They will look at angels or venture studios or friends, families, and fools, as they're commonly called, to bridge that first stage, especially in Europe still, because in the States you have a more adventurous venture capital community, I think, than here in terms of investing in ideas where there's no just investing in technologies, ideas. Here it's getting better, but here most VCs are still looking at revenue projections. Is there already some traction? Do you already have a customer? So it would be probably too optimistic to think that as a very early stage startup out of an academic context, for example, you can find money there. But to engage with them is interesting, because what they start doing then is follow you to see if what you said you were going to do, whether you more or less do it, so that they know there's some reliability in the way you're progressing. So basically, it's good to do that. Now, and the other thing that I would want to say to whoever here thinks of such an idea it's also not necessarily the first time that you're going to succeed. It's just a learning school. And I like to use the example of one of the unicorns now in Belgium, EURACTIV, which is a startup that the guys who started it, they were at our research center 12 years ago. They were involved in a project where they were working on a technology, a platform called Siruna to build scalable software as a service, a back office for scalable software as a service. It was a platform technology the company tried to market as a platform, completely failed. It was too early, but it was also pushing a technology into the market instead of an application. But they learned how to build it there. And the company went under. They were not the founders. They were just two of the software developers. They started a new company called Posios, which actually was a point-of-sale system on iPads, using that back-office technology, but with an application, right? And the application sold very well. They were the fastest grower in the portfolio of startups we had. But after 2 years, they got sold to an American company, because all the venture capital players in Belgium at those days, like 6-7 years ago, or in Europe, were giving valuations that were very low for these kind of high growth companies. And the Americans saw the strategic value and paid 2 or 3 times as much for the company. And basically, they were young founders, so they sold their company, because, if you're 30 and you can sell a company for $25 million, yeah, it's hard to resist, right? So, but they sold it.
Certainly here in Belgium, for the non-Belgians in the crowd, you have to remember that we have no capital gains tax in Belgium. So when as a founder, if you sell your company for 25 million, you have 25 million in your pocket to go play games. So that's the reason why Belgians tend to sell early.
Yeah.
Please continue. Sorry for that.
Yeah, we have a kind of strange tax system from that perspective. But
which we love. Please don't change it.
And actually, the rich French people also like it, the ones who live in Brussels. But that's beside the point.
Some Dutch people also, some German people also. You'd be surprised at how many people we have who come in Belgium to sell their company.
So basically, yeah. So, but my point is, they were the students. They went through that trajectory, and then they started another company called EURACTIV. And now they knew how to do it because they had gone through those two previous stages. They're now only 35. But they started a company with enough critical mass. They could put in their own money, meaning that they could set a valuation for other investors to come in and say, you know, we need your money, but only at this valuation. And people came in, they grew the company, and it's... Okay, they were lucky because it's a software platform to connect delivery services to restaurants, and then COVID hit, so that was also, you know, sometimes you have to be lucky, but they have a unicorn on their hands. So my point is, if you're a student coming out of the university, you have an idea, it's not necessarily the first time you're going to win, right? It could be, and you need to build those relationships and that knowledge over time. It can be in different scenarios. This is just one scenario. But that's where, at that point in time, you really engage with larger investors much later, right? The second point I want to make, and then I'll shut up, is that if you have to protect...
Before you make your second point, I'll just draw your attention on the fact that when you have been preparing your startup for 12 years, when you are at your third startup, it's not luck that hits. It's the well-preparedness of your two co-founders. Mm-hmm. So I wish to congratulate them for taking the time to prepare themselves for the roles that they are now playing with such success. Yeah. So congratulations to them, but also congratulations to you and your organization for training those guys to become such exceptional entrepreneurs.
You're right. It's the luck of COVID. Even if COVID wouldn't have struck, they would have done the same thing because they were just at the right time with the right product, and they had the technology depth from previous experiences and the people they could bring on board. But so now, and then the other thing I want to say, okay, when we talk about larger, you know, growing, why are our European companies always being bought by American companies? In a lot of cases, because they cannot grow fast enough, and they don't tackle the global market fast enough, don't have enough capital to actually keep up with the US counterparts or the Asia Pacific counterparts. And that is tied to the structure of our venture capital industry, where funds are not necessarily big enough to go to support that delivery. Even now, you know, this phase where they got 150 million in capital is an Asian Pacific and a US fund, because you have to be a very big fund to do 100 million investment or 75 million investment. So I was involved a couple of years ago with an initiative to try to get the Belgian government follow a Danish model. In Denmark, they de-risked the insurance companies. The government basically said to the insurance companies, you know, you can't invest in venture capital because it's too risky as a category for pension plans. But we will de-risk you. Just give you, you know, if you lose the money, we will basically act as a bailout. And they put that money into larger venture capital funds in Denmark. And we try to do a bit the same thing in Belgium. It's called the Belgian Growth Fund. But you know, it then can invest in venture capital firms that are somewhat larger. And now there are firms here like Fortino or SmartFin that are 250 million in size, which means they can do like a 25 million ticket in one company. at some point in time. But it's still not comparable to, you know, $1 billion fund that can do 100 million investment if you're talking about later stage. So structurally in Europe, we're still struggling, and certainly in small industries for that scaling phase. Now that's the least of the worries of somebody who comes out of academia and he needs to find angel money, but it structurally to grow our industry, it is a challenge that we cannot ignore.
Indeed, Wim. Can you pass the microphone?
En effet. Est-ce qu'on peut passer le micro à Superman, donc Bart Becks? Quand il s'agit de trouver des millions, en fait, des millions plutôt, il faut vraiment parler à Bart. C'est un géant du secteur. Il va vous expliquer pourquoi. Je vais vous demander de vous présenter aussi. Oui, bonjour, je m'appelle Bart. Je suis ici. En fait, l'organisation pour laquelle je travaille œuvre dans différents domaines, dont celui de la santé. Il s'agit notamment de la...
to digital healthcare applications and companies. So it started 2 years ago from Belgium. We now did 8 investments. It's really early. So it's from the ID and incubation of even research-driven ID. So that's one organization. Where I'm the chairman of. The second one is called EURACTIV, and EURACTIV is a European media company which is very much in the heat of the moment because we have a lot of EU policy reporting that we do, and especially from CEE countries. So we work together with, for example, Kiev Independent, one of the key independent media in Ukraine for the moment, is one of the partners of that organization. But what the organization also does is an innovation incubation program. It's a type of incubator where 30 projects a year are funded with 100K specifically on cross-international media collaboration. So you have to have something related to media innovation, and it has to be in at least 2 countries. And from that, we guide that. And then there's a third organization which is called, in which I'm involved, which is called European Innovation Council. So European Innovation Council is the one which has a bit more means, meaning that it was started 2 years ago, and we are a new board since 2 or 3 months. And it's a new program initiated from the EU just to tackle a bit the phase that Wim and José were talking about, and that was addressed before, which is after finding your angel investment and accelerating, especially when you're deep tech, it takes a bit too much time in Europe to be able to compete. And so the EIC is a 10 billion program, so of which 3 billion is direct investment. So it's the first time that the European Commission does direct investment into startups. So there's 3 billion for that, which is reserved. And then there's another 3 billion related to acceleration and research, a bit technology transfer activities. And then there's one on pure research and what they call EIT and ERC. So that's the 3 organizations, and indeed there's one which is quite ambitious because we just had an overview, and the good thing is that 5 of the European unicorns, so I think there's in total, they count about 50 or 60 in Europe now, and 5 of them are funded in at least 2 rounds by the EIC. So that's already at least a good start. Voilà.
Congratulations to the EIC. The way I remember the European institutions is that not only do you help companies when they are growing a bit bigger, and as you said, the EIC is now pushing for a direct intervention of the authorities in the capital of startups when they are big enough, but you are also helping young entrepreneurs, even when they just have a project, by not only helping them financially with very small amounts to help them build their business plan or their idea and transform their idea into a business, but they basically try to orient them to all the players around this panel today in all countries across Europe, in order for all these entrepreneurs to actually find a home for their project and find help for their project using the entrepreneurs that would be investors as business angels, for instance.
Yeah, there's you could separate it in 3 big elements. The one you described is a program called Pathfinder. It does what it says. It helps you to find your path towards getting ready to be investable or investable for a next phase. And then I think what EIC is doing fairly well is that it's a combination of either direct equity investment, but also sometimes grants. And they used to have a term, it's a non-bankable or not ready for private investors. That's less interesting, but what it does, it's a bit like in a fund. You have anchor investors, which are often public institutions. Here, EIC tries to be that to what is then called crowding in additional investors. So hopefully it each time results the amount they put in ideally is times 4 because they could act as an anchor for especially deep tech entrepreneurs here.
Thank you. What would you define as one of the success of the previous programs? Because your program is now pretty young; it's like 3 months old, and then there was this Horizon 2020 program that was sort of prolonged for a year and a half before EIC was ready. What would you define as one of the 2 or 3 key success companies in AI deep tech that the EIC has been helping, or the previous program H2020?
Without going too much into individual companies, but I think there's 3 domains that have clearly gotten most success and where you see that there's an acceleration in terms of investment areas. One is healthcare. All of Europe is doing fairly well on healthcare. Belgium is also a good example in it, but Europe as a whole. Second one is related to facilitating Green Deal. If you look at one of the issues that we have as Europe, if we take a step back, there is basically 3 big types of distribution platforms. One is what we know, distribution of services and content, and we know that we don't own any of them. That is a typical GAFA. All those distribution platforms are owned by Facebook and Google and Apple, and Europe doesn't own them. So there's an issue of what they call tech sovereignty there. That's one issue. A second one is, you could say the same for energy distribution. And currently we live in an issue that we have to rethink energy distribution. In Belgium it's a very hot theme, but it's basically all over the world. But Europe has made itself very dependable on Russian gas or on nuclear energy, and you suddenly see that Germany has to turn around a 10-year policy in 3 weeks suddenly. Belgium, we're voting every week on something, so we have to rethink distribution platforms on that, and that's a very important one. And then the third one is everything related to deep tech IT, and that goes from AI, where Wim and Josh are working on a lot. That goes to, there's a lot on quantum computing for the moment. And then the big unknown a bit is everything that you could catch under the, let's call it the Web3 as a whole. Everything that goes from protocols to and staking and all kind of coins and tokens, up to using NFT for other elements, or DeFi or centralized finance. It's a big unknown, but it's interesting to see that all of us, or most of us here, we can live an innovation wave of Web number 3. What a luck in life to be able to live in that. We've seen the one, the first wave, we have the second wave, and we're in the third wave, and everybody knows that the feeling is a bit, can we miss it? We missed a bit the second wave as a continent in terms of distribution platforms. Is the third wave really going to redefine and build on that? And can you risk to miss out of it, or should you now really invest already very early, and especially on the deep tech side, where you could have some kind of defendable competitive advantage?
Thank you. You're definitely praying for my parish, because I'm not the chairman of LeanSquare and Meusinvest anymore. I'm the chairman of Bit4You, which is basically one of the local platforms. What I really liked in your intervention and Wim's intervention is that they define some of the successes that they have met. And so I'm going to be a bit tough on my 3 first panelists, is ask them, why don't you cite 1 or 2 successes that you have had, both with BeAngels and with Highway AI and with Theodorus? I think it's important that our audience can hear what you have been doing that they would like to emulate with you in the future.
So just to stay on the topic, because as I mentioned earlier, BeAngels is completely sector agnostic. So we've had a few IPOs, we've had many exits, but maybe one that is interesting and that is related to the topic of the day, which is artificial intelligence. So we had one of our portfolio companies was called Musimap. It was a company that was specialized in understanding how you feel when you listen to music thanks to artificial intelligence. So, you know, Spotify, for example, has only 5% of the music catalog in the world available. So basically, people listen to the same thing and they're pushed to listen to the same catalog. But Meusinvest was set up 20 years ago by a musicologist who actually tagged the feelings and emotions, like the subset of emotions that you could feel, and subsets of genres that each tune was actually generating. And so they created a company out of that. So I think we mentioned, you know, long-term, the long-term aspect of entrepreneurship. So, but he started this as a PhD, and then he continued for 20 years, and they set up this company, which was acquired last summer by Utopia, which is one of the very, very hot and upcoming Swiss company, but yeah, acquiring probably a company a week at the moment. So because there are so many challenges in the music industry as to you know, how to value the catalogs for musicians, yeah, merchandising, revenue generation. It's a big revolution with all the new players, and so that was quite an interesting success. Obviously, it was a very, very strong technological company that had also its challenges in trying to find its market and trying to find, you know, how to commercialize that, who was the right client. And in the end, it arrived at a time where it became really a hot topic of you know, trying to differentiate yourself with regards to competitors by being able to tag automatically, you know, thousands of millions of songs for different uses, including being able to define also your personality, your MBTI, etc., based on your Spotify playlist, for example. So some fun stuff as well.
I remember those guys because I crossed their paths quite a few times over the last 20 years, believe it or not. And surprisingly enough, they were the closest to one of the first implementations of AI for the grand public. It was pretty amazing what they have been building as a company. And I'm happy to know that they are still alive and that they are thriving thanks to you guys and thanks to their new partner today.
Yeah, well, so just to give you, so obviously he started this 20 years ago. Our members first invested, I think, as angels in 2014, probably. And then our fund, because we have scale-up funds, which are positioned post-business angel, pre-venture capital or pre-corporate acquisition, invested, I think, in 2018. And then we exited, or partially exited, 2022.
My first online music company I created in 1996. And then it survived until 2003, and then went bankrupt. You know, it's part of the game as entrepreneurs and as investors. And that guy already back then was there advising us on musicology in general. So frankly, I'm happy to see how long time, once again, it has taken for him, and that's what we illustrated earlier on with Wim, that as an entrepreneur, it takes time to be successful. There is a good old saying in entrepreneurship that says that instant success takes 15 years, and when it takes 12 or 20, it's actually pretty much in the standard time that it takes, apart from very rare exceptions, to be perfectly honest. George, your time to state one of your proudest success moments or companies.
Yeah, iWayI was created in 2021, so I don't have a unicorn yet. Will come, but
come on.
Well, I hope not in 15 years. But there are two things that I'm very proud of since I've started working on in this company. I've met tens of guys who have an amazing idea, an amazing energy, but they were going nowhere. The first guy is Sébastien Leclerc. He's a 50 years old self-made technologist from immigration, has been fighting all his life, has been progressing by doing, finding ways, doing effort. But for the last 2 years, he has this great idea, spent 100,000 euro of his own money to start it, and went nowhere. And I spent 6 months with Sébastien to reshape the idea, to put it in a way that it is investable. I think you use the term. And now, thanks also to the support of Claire and Angels, is on the track maybe to be that next unicorn, that story. And that's, for me, that's what makes me wake up in the morning and go to the office and be proud of what am I doing. And
what would you define as to be the most striking part of his product or service that we can all understand? What exactly is he doing?
So he has the idea that AI will allow to solve everything that is complex with data. Today, I think it was said this morning, data is very hard to manage, it's very hard to govern. There is more and more data in the world. The companies can't keep up with things because it requires a lot of manual work from human beings. Basically, the guy wants to create the robot who will replace human to manage and govern data. If he's able to do that, that can be a big market. I see.
I like big, hairy ambitions, and that's one of them. Thank you.
And the second example, because Sébastien is a 50, and I'm a 50 years old guy also, and I almost have a persona that is like, we are 50, we want to do the last gig before, you know, the big journey. That's one of the, well, maybe not, I say to Italy for the retirement. I'm not saying the other journey around the river, right? So the other persona is the youngster. So we met that PhD from ULB, very bright guy. The guy has done his PhD, has created this amazing cube, immersive technology that he has deployed in retirement house so that he can relieve elderlies who are suffering from mental issues without requiring medication. And he wants now to make it a product and to sell it to all over the world. And that's not one project I'm going to support because I'm really doing software in AI, but I still work with him to help him with two things. One, he was hijacked by predatory early-stage investors. They are not all so nice. The guy who took 60% of the company for a small amount of money, promised all the things that he didn't do. So we help him to get this, let's say, bad investors out of the way. And now we are putting him back on track to get investors in the market that he tries to pursue. So why am I sharing this? Because it's not something that I will benefit from, but I think by having those discussions, a bit like this panel, to the point of Wim as well, that we can put our experience and our help for the guys who really wants to do something. That's also something that makes me proud and that makes me feel that I contribute to the ecosystem here in Belgium.
Thank you. I was going to say it's the whole point of an ecosystem. We can't benefit from everything, but we can help the whole ecosystem. What's the name of that project so that if we can help, we know how he's called?
It's immersive technology. Mm-hmm. They are based in Waterloo.
Okay.
And if you are interested, I can put you in.
I'm always interested to meet new friends, that's sure. Adrien, why don't you tell us what your most striking success story has been?
Yeah, so it's a success story that's a bit different because it was not an entrepreneur who started something from scratch in AI and went to create a company, but it's a company that solved a big problem while partnering up with a university to solve one of their core problems with AI. So it was a company in which we invested in Canada. It was called Essentia. And basically what they do is they detect arrhythmia, cardiac arrhythmia. So today when you have an arrhythmia or the doctor suspects that you have one, they put on you a very complicated device that needs training from the doctors, etc. And that you will have to wear for 48 hours. You cannot shower, you cannot do sports, you cannot do anything. And during those 48 hours, it will try to detect arrhythmia. And the guys from Montreal, they decided to basically put a very small patch, much more simple, and that you can wear for 2 weeks, take a shower, do whatever you want, and that will detect it on a much larger period, but with less sensitivity. And basically, the problem that they had, it was for the convenience, a lot of patients liked it, but it required a lot of people behind screens looking at the data for 2 or 3 weeks, trying to spot the arrhythmias in the graphs. And so they decided to partner up with a university to try to detect, actually, with artificial intelligence, where the arrhythmias were. And now, basically, it's done, it screens, it looks at the key 10, 15 moments. Someone looks at that, in 10 minutes it's done. So the productivity was huge, and thanks to that, now they scaled 10 times in a few years.
And once you have detected arrhythmia, what is going to happen with the results in question? Do they direct you to a cardiologist, or do you?
Yeah, the results go back to the cardiologist, and then he interprets the data and looks at what the next steps are.
Essentia, you call it.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to get in contact with these guys. No later than this morning, one of my friends called me to explain what difficulties his son has. Since birth, he has had arrhythmia, and he's now 15, and he's at his 4th open heart surgery at the age of 15 years old. So basically, I certainly need to talk to you about it. So I'm really happy to hear that artificial intelligence is actually solving such problem. And once again, the success that you are defining is a success based on the problematic of timing. And the timing is good for that kind of product in AI today. And what you described earlier on, Claire, on Meusimap, was basically a problematic of timing. The guy started way too early and was right way too early before AI was really available for this kind of subject today. And Wim gave us a really good example of timing with DeliverAct that arrived right on time, and where basically the founders took their time to actually address the right timing on the market. Before we close this panel, which is going to be in like 5 to 10 minutes, I'd like to have your opinion of each of you of what will be the hottest timing startups or the hottest timing fields in which all of the entrepreneurs we have on the panels and in the audience today should be investing most of their talent and their time in order to arrive right on time on the market. You start. You're the big hairy guy, so you start.
Well, in the area of AI and data, what the reality is, if you look at the market, is that most AI startups right now, or most AI companies, are still service companies, and that productization is still a dream for a lot of those companies. You know, I'll give an example of a company I know quite well in Ghent called RoboVision, and they basically use camera recognition software for all kinds of domains, but primarily agricultural. They actually use image recognitions and video technology, processing technology, together with robots to sort, for example, vegetables and stuff like that. So they're automating processes in agriculture, and they are trying to package that as a product, but it's a challenge. So you see, most of these companies are still, 70–80% of their revenue is service revenue, and it's not software as a service revenue yet. So it's not yet a scalable model. So I think the way to look at that market right now is to what we look at in terms of investable cases. And interesting domains is everything that can make AI more productizable. Yeah, like machine learning operation, MLOps as it's called, like DevOps. Trying to basically monitor the models, the data models, essentially make them more robust, ensure that you can actually deliver a product, and you don't necessarily always need data scientists actually fine-tuning the implementation and stuff like that. So that's where right now I think there is a huge domain that still needs a lot of research, but which will help structurally the industry become more mature, or that segment of the industry.
There was one thing related to timing that I was thinking about the example that Wim gave. So the example was there was a software company called Seruna. They failed. They had a new startup called Pulsios or Lightspeed. It's all the iPad registers that you see in a restaurant. That's a Belgian company. And then they became DeliverAct, which is one of the unicorns. But what I still remember is because they were from iMinds, and at the time Wim was CEO and I was chairman, and it was one of the very first board meetings where their first startup failed. And they wanted to start a new company. And on the board, there was a discussion between people, yeah, but should we keep supporting them because their startup failed? This is 7–8 years ago. That was the mentality at the time. We've changed a lot, but at that time, these guys were nearly not able to start the second company, which is the Blueprint, which was a success, the Blueprint for one of the a couple of unicorns that they are, because the mentality was they failed. so we're not going to support them anymore. And in terms of mentality, that's a big change, I think, that a lot of us have been going through. And for me, it was one of the first time that I thought, if you're not an entrepreneur and you're on a board, you can actually do something good being on a board. Yeah, because I was doubting that. I still doubt it now and then. But anyway, and in terms of timing, what kind of industries do I like? I really like the healthcare one, and it is because it has been for 2 years so central in our lives, but a bit on a negative perspective, that healthcare is still fully on our agenda, but now we're going to have an app telling us, hey, Bart, you want to be more healthy, be careful with this, and we're going to have predictive and guiding elements on all kinds of healthcare. We just made an investment in a German company, doesn't all have to be Belgian ones, BioExplore, which is helping us with detecting early cancer indications. There's another one where I'm just not going to take the ones that we invested in with eHealth Venture, but I like them a lot. One is on a platform to help kids with learning disabilities. A third one is where we work together, which is called Evoluno, which is an app that helps people to judge on mental well-being, mental health care, and specifically over the last 2 years, usually it was at a coffee, are you doing fine? And now it is, you can indicate on an app, I feel burnt out or I don't feel good anymore, and you can be helped on that. So I think healthcare and AI is a really interesting one. And in terms of timing, I think the entire, what we talked about, Web3, from all kind of tokens to cryptons, is an interesting one because of the short time frame on which huge valuation and interesting companies will be built. And so if you look at Web 1, it took 15 years, Web 2, it took 10 years to build a reasonable company, and now it's going to take 3-4 years. Look at the top 100 most valuable companies. Yesterday somebody presented it, 74 of the top 100 companies are invented since the Web 1. That's incredible. 3/4 of the most valuable companies in the world. If this third wave has the same effect, in the next 5 years, we're going to see such impactful, long-lasting companies, and being part of that is really kind of great to be at, I think.
Yeah. We have 2 minutes left, and so I suggest that Claire, you open the panel. You're going to have to close the panel. I give you the full responsibility.
Oh, really?
What's your take of the right field to be in AI or deep tech today, timing-wise?
Well, it's very difficult because you're asking us to be like Nostradamus and see in the future, right? And I guess nobody can really do that. But if I go back to the motivation of angels of saying we want to invest, we want to build financial value, but we want to have impact. And if we look at the last 2 years that we have lived with so many disruptions, so we've talked about health, but I think, AI for impact, for me, is going to be a very important topic. And so, for example, fintech or access to finance is another area where we see a lot of disruption. We've seen a startup recently that just enables people in Africa to have access to credit, thought about in a different way, working with banks in a different way, handling data in a different way. That's for a whole continent. So I would say, just impact vision and international.
Congratulations. Thank you very much for this panel. I was asked to finish at this very right time, so I think we are in the timing. If you feel that your startup is in one of the various fields that we have been talking about, well, speak to these guys. They are here to help you. Thanks for your attention.